Is human freedom something we are born with? A newborn baby chooses to cry or smile, reaches out to grasp something. These actions are more instinctive than learned, occurring spontaneously according to free will. However, as we form societies and live together, freedom becomes restricted. Rules and institutions limit what we can do. Then how can we become free again? The story I'm about to tell you is the journey of a child who grew up like a machine, knowing nothing of freedom, breaking free from bondage to gain liberty, and ultimately becoming a liberal philosopher representing all of humanity. James Mill. Don't be mistaken, this man is not our protagonist. He's the protagonist's father. James Mill was a prominent political economist in Britain. He was also a utilitarian philosopher of his time. The early 19th century, Britain, steam engines and mechanized factory production rapidly increased wealth across society. But these gains were concentrated among a small number of capitalists and landowners. The majority of workers struggled for survival in deplorable conditions. Factory workers endured long hours of 12 to 16 hours a day, and child labor was commonplace. Wages were barely enough to maintain subsistence. It was against this backdrop that utilitarianism emerged. Utilitarianism proposed the greatest happiness of the greatest number as the standard for judging society's institutions and policies.
The pleasure of a count and the pleasure of a shoeshine boy are of equal value.
This philosophy gained strong support from workers and social reformers. At the center of utilitarian thought stood Jeremy Bentham, the mentor and colleague of James Mill. James Mill and Jeremy Bentham sought to systematically organize and propagate utilitarianism. The two held a clear ambition to transform Bentham's utilitarianism from an intuitive claim into a rigorous philosophical system. In this process, James Mill's son caught Jeremy Bentham's attention. Bentham proposed to James Mill that they raise his son as the personification of the utilitarian ideal. From that moment, he implemented an early education program that defied all imagination. At last, our protagonist enters the scene. John Stuart Mill, son of James Mill. Mill learned Greek from the age of 3. This was rare, even in the upper-class educational curriculum of Britain at the time. By 8, Mill was reading Plato and Herodotus, not in translation, but in the original texts. Simply understanding ancient Greek was already in the realm of adult scholarship at the time, making him truly a prodigy. Yet Mill had no friends throughout his childhood. His father forbade him from socializing with children his own age. Mill's rigorous education did not end there. Through his father's arrangements, he joined the East India Company. At the time, the East India Company was not simply a commercial enterprise. It was essentially a government, having been granted authority by the British Crown to govern India, responsible for administration, taxation, judiciary, and military affairs. Mill had finally stepped onto the perfect stage to put utilitarian philosophy into practice. At that time, he was only 17 years old. Mill's days were filled with drafting documents on British rule over India. His evenings were spent writing philosophical essays. Outwardly, his life was perfect. Brilliant intellect, stable employment, and even a clear objective and grand ambition to bring happiness to humanity through utilitarian reform. However, One acquaintance described Mill,
"You're like a great steam engine."
precise and logical, but devoid of any human warmth. Even from Mill's own perspective, something was missing from his life.
Am I a person whose emotions have died?
Mill suffered from depression for 6 months. What rescued him at the end of that deep despair was literature, particularly Jean-François Marmontel's memoirs. At 20 years old, Mill shed tears for the first time. His emotions were revived through empathy for another's sorrow. Around the age of 22, encountering the poetry of William Wordsworth opened another world to him. Reading Wordsworth's poetry, Mill gained an important insight.
Happiness that enables human growth is more valuable happiness.
Mill experienced firsthand that not all happiness is equal, that qualitative differences exist. This experience became the catalyst for Mill to reformulate utilitarianism. This was the beginning of Mill's qualitative utilitarianism. This philosophy went one step further than Jeremy Bentham's quantitative utilitarianism. Qualitative utilitarianism prompted society to ask not how many people benefited, but rather, have people come to live better lives when evaluating society? And for a better life, it argued that humans need trial and error and freedom of choice. There was another figure who directly inspired On Liberty, the one person Mill loved his entire life, Harriet Taylor.
Mrs. Harriet Taylor, this is John Stuart Mill.
In 1830, the 24-year-old Mill was introduced to Harriet Taylor. From their first meeting, an immediate intellectual connection formed between them. Harriet became more than just an intellectual companion to Mill. Her sharp insights on women's rights, individual liberty, and social reform fundamentally influenced Mill's thought. But this fateful meeting had a critical obstacle. She was already a married woman and the mother of 2 children.
Look, he's watching us right now.
If what I hear is true, they should be drummed out of society.
Mill and Harriet were condemned simply for defying social conventions. It was then that Mill realized, what is more terrifying than legal punishment is the tyranny of public opinion. He experienced firsthand the absurdity of a world where the gaze and judgment of the majority define an individual's life and strip away the freedom of choice. In 1851, 2 years after Harriet's husband passed away, Mill and Harriet finally married. During the 7 years after their marriage, Mill devoted himself to writing On Liberty. Harriet challenged Mill's ideas and engaged in debates with him, stimulating his intellectual work. Even on profound subjects, the two discussed together and expanded each other's thinking. Mill later confessed in his autobiography,
"Every thought in On Liberty was a collaborative work with Harriet, and without her, this book would never have been born."
However, in November 1858, tragedy struck. Harriet passed away in Avignon during a trip to southern France. Even in his deep grief, Mill resolved to publish the book. In 1859, he published On Liberty. The dedication in the book reads as follows:
To the beloved memory of the friend and wife, I dedicate this volume. Like all I have written, this belongs as much to her as to me.
Even after Harriet's death and the publication of On Liberty, Mill's life did not stop. In 1865, at the age of 60, he ran for Parliament from the Westminster constituency. Mill began putting into practice the freedom and insights contained in On Liberty. He boldly proposed agendas that were radical for the time.
I stand for the expansion of the franchise to every worker, the rightful vote for every woman, and a just reform for the lands of Ireland.
The Almighty himself could not be elected on such a programme.
What were the results of Mill's election? Surprisingly, he won. 2 years later, Mill created another historic moment. He introduced the first women's suffrage bill in the history of the British Parliament. Though the bill was defeated,
Votes for women!
it became an important seed for the women's suffrage movement that followed. Throughout his time as a Member of Parliament, Mill raised his voice for women's rights, individual liberty, and the protection of the socially vulnerable. Until May 7th, 1873, when he rested beside his beloved wife, Harriet, in Avignon, France, John Stuart Mill's entire life was on liberty. Nearly 170 years later, this book still asks us, what is liberty, and are you at liberty?